with that same 64 megapixels, this S20 can also record 8K video, which I had no idea. I thought that 8K was only on the S20 Ultra, but it's here as well. In all these shots, as I continue to zoom in, you'll see that the iPhone maxes out at 10 times zoom. The S20 can go all the way up to 30x, and while it still gets pretty pixelated and sort of unusable at that extent, we can clearly see just how much sharper the S20 looks over the iPhone. It's kind of like night and day difference. And again, just because the camera allows us to zoom all the way into 30x doesn't mean we have to, but to just go third or halfway produces excellent.
Now switching to the rear-facing triple camera setups. These are really fun to compare side by side, and I've always been a huge fan of the ultra-wide lens, creating that immersive, fresh perspective shot. The primary lens on each is 26mm, both at 12 megapixel f1.8. Both of these look really nice and sharp with beautiful colors, good dynamic range, fantastic looking white balance, and clarity is honestly pretty insane for a smartphone camera. And as for the telephoto lens, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. The S20 is what Samsung calls a 3 times hybrid optic zoom. And basically what I don't think a lot of people realize, myself included, this is where the 64 megapixel camera is. And as for the lens, well, it's just a little tighter field of view than that primary lens. So all that extra zoom range is mostly digital zoom. Now this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because with that same 64 megapixels, this S20 can also record 8K video, which I had no idea. I thought that 8K was only on the S20 Ultra, but it's here as well. In all these shots, as I continue to zoom in, you'll see that the iPhone maxes out at 10 times zoom. The S20 can go all the way up to 30x, and while it still gets pretty pixelated and sort of unusable at that extent, we can clearly see just how much sharper the S20 looks over the iPhone. It's kind of like night and day difference. And again, just because the camera allows us to zoom all the way into 30x doesn't mean we have to, but to just go third or halfway produces excellent shots. For my eye, sticking to around the 10x zoom maximum is an incredible range to have, and from 0.5 to 10x, the images and even video, as you'll see in a minute, look really good. And look at this, as I zoom into the downtown map sign, it's really fun and impressive to see how much more clarity we have on the S20 with all those extra megapixels going to work for us. I heard rumors that the next iPhone 12 Pro might have a 64 megapixel sensor. This would be great to see. When we're zoomed out on the ultra wide and the primary lens, I think both of them look pretty dang awesome. Now this was another fun example, switching through the lenses and sensors from ultra wide down to ultra zoomed in on that rocket. It's quite the difference in resolution. Now speaking of those 64 megapixels, this was another big feature I hadn't heard anyone really talking about. And on the S20, we can snap full resolution photos at 64 megapixels. So with the ratio of 4:3, this is a resolution of 9248 by 6936. At first I thought this was a little cheesy and maybe a party gimmick, but I was wrong as soon as I snapped some side-by-sides versus the 12 megapixel iPhone and then started zooming way in. It's again a big difference in terms of sharpness, clarity, and resolution. At the end of the day though, megapixels only go so far, and there's many other important features I like to focus on, like dynamic range. In this flower shot, it's a good example. We can see these tiny little white specks on the flower, which I think are pollen dots. Kind of amazing for the S20. However, the exposure is blown out on some of those key highlight details. Here's a few low light shots, first on the ultra wide, and the silly iPhone can't do night shot on the ultra wide lens, while the S20's looks really good. Competition evens out a bit on the primary lens, but the iPhone is still leaning a bit too warm of its white balance, while the S20 hit it more accurately with a clean white LED light. Plus, it's sharp and nice looking. And the telephoto lens, well, another win for the S20 in my opinion. And while the iPhone shot doesn't look terrible, I feel like the S20 looks just a tad sharp. Moving on, as I zoom into the ducks, I'd say the iPhone's 2x telephoto lens still looks really good, and the S20 has that farther reach and zoom, which can be a nice option to have. Switching to the primary lens, they both again look really great. The HDR and colors look nice, and when jogging around, I'd say the S20 has a little too much glitchy jittering in its stabilization. While the iPhone looks a bit smoother, it still has that bad HDR flickering effect. I'd really like to see improved optical image stabilization in both of these phones. In this spot, let me quick pause and show you the highlight and fall off comparison between my shiny skin reflection in the sunlight, and personally, I'd vote the iPhone looks a bit better. The S20 is blowing out a bit too much of my skin. Here's another shot starting ultra wide, then medium lens, and then the telephoto, and even though the S20 has that farther zoom range, it just looks okay sometimes. It's not an optical zoom, whereas an iPhone has that 2x telephoto lens, so it's still able to produce some nice clarity at that 2x range. It's funny because 99% of the time when these photos or videos are going to be shared on smartphones and social medias, no one is even going to tell the difference. In my patent pending autofocus test, the results are so close. I have to slow the footage way down, and frame by frame, I was able to notice the S20 was faster to respond to start hunting for focus, but it was oddly the iPhone that more often snapped and locked on